And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Now, this week we've got a camera club special going on. What I'll do here actually is I'll just read you a little bit of text, because what happened is there's obviously when lockdown happened, various camera clubs suddenly couldn't meet. And three local camera clubs got together, Abbey Camera Club, Lawburn and Stewart Tree Camera Club, and decided that they would sort of pool their resources a little bit. And what they did was they sent out a little bit of a kind of press release type thing, where they said, the last few months have been difficult for all community groups across Dumfries and Galloway in southwest Scotland. With lockdown has come the cancellation of all meetings, with no opportunity to travel to meet up with others with similar interests or even outdoors at social distance. However, three of the region's camera clubs have been managing to keep their members connected, albeit in a new and different way. With the early conclusion of their normal seasons, Abbey, Lawburn and Stewart Tree camera clubs decided they wanted to keep in touch with their members and encourage them to keep making pictures. Thus, a weekly open competition was developed, with participants submitting entries electronically. The competition has camera and phone categories and is judged by the previous week's winners. The competition has been open to all and there have been no entry fees. Now, I got chatting with Keith of one of the camera clubs, who and we were talking about, he's been following and submitting to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. And so we thought, why don't we just sort of tie this in a bit? Why not just, it's got the weekly competition. What about if I judged one of the competitions? So we set up a date for today, and the theme was to be tell a story. And basically because I tend to be more of a narrative storytelling photographer, and I'm always banging on in these podcasts about the need to be clear on your story. So that just sort of felt like quite a fun kind of idea to do. So rather than me doing the standard bit of talking through a particular photo shoot I did to begin with and then talking about a particular photography technique, this week is essentially an extended critique version, where what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the different photos. There's the two categories. First of all, there's the phone photo category, well, there's about 8 or 9 entries, I think. And then there's the DSLR category, which I think has about 14. And I'm going to look at each of the photos individually and give some kind of feedback or comment on them. So hopefully everybody who took part should get some kind of feedback on their photo. And but also it's very much a case of, the great thing about critique is that anybody at home can also be picking up a lot of information, because each photo has got slightly different things that need to be addressed. And at that point, you suddenly go, maybe that's where I kind of struggling a bit with my own photos. So that's pretty much the idea. Now, I'm going to be periodically checking into Facebook. So if I'm doing this on Facebook Live. So if you're on Facebook, do please leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Say hi. If this is your first time, let me know where you're from. Whether that's Carlisle, Germany, or Castle Douglas. It's always good to know that there's somebody out there actually watching this. And alternatively, if you are watching this on YouTube, I record these as they go. The following day, I put them up on YouTube. Also, feel free to leave comments as well. Hit the subscribe button if you find this useful, and the little notification bell to make sure you're informed of new episodes as they come up. Also, if you find any of this really useful, then do consider leaving a wee donation at paypal.me/Kim Ayres. It's not compulsory, but it's always appreciated. So that's where we're at. So this evening is the Camera Club competition, and I'll go through the photos, and then at the end of each section I will announce first, second and third, and and as I go you'll get a sense of In fact, actually, let's have a little kind of play along at home if you want. If you know, if I put up a photo and you go, oh, that's got to be a winner, then leave a little comment. Say, oh, I love this one. I'll give you the titles of each of the pictures as I move on to them. Or if you think when I'm giving a bit of critique I've maybe missed something, or you have any questions, then again, you know, pop a comment in. And periodically I will go and check in on the Facebook comments and see, you know, and I'll respond to any questions as we go. So this is to be kind of as informative and helpful as possible. So if you've got questions, or if there's something that you're not sure about, then, you know, please just leave a comment. Right. Okay, so let's get started with this. In fact, if I just flip over to here, I'll quick couple of comments first before I start. Pat says, thanks Kim, made it. I'm so glad, Pat. Pat's missed a couple of these. I think sometimes these are it's not always obvious quite where you're supposed to get to. Keith, hi Kim, here live this week. Oh, that's great to know, Keith. Katie Roberts, hello from Melbourne. Good. Wow, well done, Katie. This must be, I've got no idea, about what, 3-4 o'clock in the morning for you. That's impressive. Scott, you just come in. Hi Kim, can't wait to get started. Okay, I won't hang around much longer. And Bill, hi Kim. Catherine, hi. Yeah, that's great. Good. Thanks very much for leaving putting the comments in. So let's get on to this then. And what I'll do is we'll start off with the phone entries, and I'm basically at the moment I'm going through in alphabetical order, and then afterwards, like I say, I'll let you know which ones I've chosen and why. And what I'm also hoping within this is to give you some insights into the notion of competition and judging as well, and why what might win in one competition wouldn't win in another. So hopefully you'll kind of get a better sense of what's going on, that behind the scenes sense of the judgment of a competition. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is let's flip over to here, and this is the first picture I've got. I don't have any names attached to any of these. This one is called 1948. Now, really the competition is called Tell a Story. But in a way, at the heart of what I think of all photography is about is telling a story. It is communicating something. Now, it doesn't have to be a great long War and Peace level of story, but it is about a communication of a mood, an idea, a concept, a feeling. The real thing behind a photo is you've taken the image and you took that image rather than a different image. So why did you take this? Why did you angle the camera this way rather than that way? Why did you decide to include these things and not include those things? And to begin with, when we take photos, we zoom in on one thing, and then we may quite often ignore what's going on in the background. And then the more advanced we become, the more we become aware that every aspect of a photo is either contributing to or detracting from the story we're trying to tell. Now, in this one, what have we got? 1948, and we're in a graveyard. And it looks like the white graves that sort of disappear back into the distance have that kind of military war grave kind of things going on. It's called 1948. Now, I will say the images I was sent were relatively low resolution. They were just sort of web-sized images, so I can't really zoom in and get in much detail. I can see on the writing here, on this grave, it says, these remains were reinterred at Brookwood, Surrey, 17th of October 1948. So that's presumably where the 1948 has come from. Underneath that, CI-GIT? Or CIT, I'm not totally sure. The Capitaine Jean Arnaud. My French is appalling. Mort Alas, okay, died probably aged 32 years in an accident, the aviation plane accident by the look of it, 29th of September, and then 19. But what's being cut off here is when the person died. I mean, if the remains were reinterred in 1948, that idea is that the remains have been taken from somewhere and placed somewhere else. So it wasn't originally buried in 1948, but I don't know when he was originally buried. Is that important to the story? Well, at this point, I don't really know. And part of the trickiness here is I'm not sure exactly what story was being gone for. Now, if this person happens to be an ancestor, a relative of the person who took the photo, then this becomes a very meaningful photo on that. Maybe the person who took the photo was just out there and thought they quite liked the way the lines are. There's some nice strong diagonals running into the picture. The fact that they've decided to convert to black and white is presumably to give it more of a kind of moody age or ageless feel. You can see bits of sun and shadow in the background, so it's obviously on a bright sunny day, although there's moody clouds in the background. But they've chosen to go for black and white rather than make use of the colour. So the only thing that I can get from this is essentially it's a moody graveyard shot. If there's more of a story to it than that, it's not coming across in the photo. The other thing I would say is, for me, it has a tilt to, well, my left. In your case, it would sort of look that way. Now, part of that is maybe the gravestones are slightly tilted, but I think one of the problems we have here, and it crops up in a couple of the other photos as well, so it's worth addressing, is this obviously being used with a wide angle lens. Now, this is a phone photo, and virtually all phones have a wide angle lens on them. And that allows them to fit more into the picture when they take it, except for the fact the problem is it distorts at the outer edges and things get curved out. And what we've got here is the strong vertical up in the top right corner. That's pretty much as straight as it gets. And then as we move further towards the left of the picture, it tilts to the left. And so I feel the problem is it's been anchored on one side and then it tilts over. So if I just, for example, let's just open that into Photoshop, just very briefly to give you an idea of what I mean. Is that going to open? It's thinking about it. Right, okay, here we go. If I take this and I just tilt it a little, something like maybe that. So what we try and do is we get a stronger vertical in the middle of it, rather than, and then whilst it still tilts off over to the left and it still tilts off over to the right, there's a stronger vertical in the middle, and that kind of holds it a bit better. Now, obviously, because we've turned it and cropped it, we've lost bits at the top of the grave, and so there is but we'd also lost bits at the bottom as well. So my biggest suggestion with this would be give it more room to breathe, step back a little bit, don't crop in quite so close, make sure you've got the straight lines. But other than that, you know, you've gone for that moody feel. So that's 1948. Let's move on to the next photo. This one is called Digger. Now, any thoughts? I think there's a couple of things. One is there's a feeling of it's tilted. For sure, more so than 1948. There's a very, very strong horizontal bar at the top of the fence, and it's not quite horizontal, it just sort of tilts off. And you can then, of course, the roof of the building behind is also tilted. And now, while you can sometimes get away, a tilt can be quite a powerful trick. It has to look like a tilt. You really kind of got to make it, you've got to tilt sort of beyond 25, 30 degrees so everybody knows it's supposed to be a tilt rather than you didn't quite get it straight. So with this just feels like you didn't quite get it straight. So straightening it would help. But there is no doubt the big problem here is the top of the fence is smack bang in the kind of middle of the photo. And it's a shame because it grabs all the attention. And I think if you would manage to stand on tiptoes, move forward, shoot over the top of the fence, then I think you would have been in a much, much stronger position. And because actually the digger, the building, the rubble, you know, there's a story there. There's a story of, you know, destruction and decay and, you know, maybe leading to rebirth and rebuild. But at the moment it's in that destruction part. It's clouded over. But I can see what you were doing. You're out with your phone, you see it, you go, oh, let's grab that. But where do we go? Let's go. Skip that. Okay, let's pull it up in here and let's just open that with Photoshop again, just to give you a sense of what I mean. If we tilt that and we make that more horizontal, that immediately helps the composition. Now, on your phone, you're highly unlikely to have the software where you can delete things out or paint over. I've got Photoshop, it's a lot more sophisticated. Now, this is only going to be very, very rough, but it's to give you an idea. If I go along with my little patch tool here, I can essentially remove the top of that fence. Now, it's not completely because we've still got little bars coming up here, but do you see now that within this picture, we've got a much better sense of the digger? And in fact, I would say that's where the real story is. If we move this down here and we move this up here, in a kind of rule of thirds kind of way. So we've got, now, perhaps you can see that we've got a stronger shaped photo. And there's a nice diagonal coming up from here, which then curves over the roof. So you're creating a bit of shape. And I think if you'd done that would have made this a more powerful photo. The other thing is the opposite, is if we, let's go back to the original, is if part of your story was you were wanting the barrier in the way because your story is to do with a kind of being blocked off, that, you know, not being allowed access. At that point, I think again you would have needed to step further back and made the gate and the post, the gate and with the fence. You would have needed to have focused on that, made that more prominent in your story. But my suspicion is the story really in this photo is about the digger. So straighten it, stand in a different place so that you can get the picture, and I think then you'll be able to make a stronger sense of the story. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's go on to the next photo. This one is called Fruits and Labours, and what we've got here is, well, it looks like it's going to be cherry jam or cherry preserve. So it's a kind of kitchen still life. We've got a bunch of cherries, we've got the leaves too, we've got the pan, we've got the jars ready to pour into it, we've got the thermometer, looks like there's, we've got a pack of sugar behind, we've got the cookbook, sugar back there, and the lemon for the lemon juice as well. So what we've got there then is we've got a full kind of kind of still life of anticipation, I suppose, with this, which is quite fun. Anybody who's been in a kitchen when jam's being made, you can almost start to smell it, which is quite fun. In terms of then, if you're taking that story and you're trying to intensify that story, there are different things that I think you could do. Again, there's a sense of it feels tilted over, and I think squaring it up would help. There's also, put the leaves on the cherries, and I absolutely get the idea of having the green complementing the red, but I think there's rather too much just down on the front here. This front part of the bowl is really where you want the maximum cherryness in a way. And if you took some of these, either remove some of these leaves or push them more, laid them more at the back, I think that would probably make it a little bit more eye-grabbing. It feels a bit too close in again. And again, this is one of those where I think stepping out just back literally a few inches, you know, you've cropped off the edge of the jars, you've cropped off the edge of the saucepan, And I don't think you necessarily needed to. I think a little bit more room to breathe, and you could have created a little bit more of a still life feel to it. And actually, if you really wanted to up that notion of the still life, then we come on to the notion of the lighting. Now, I can't really tell where the lighting is coming from. It might just be an overhead light in the kitchen, or you might have a biggish window behind you. But if you look at a lot of traditional painting still life, very often what you have is you have a large window light. You can't see it, but you can't see the window, but you can sense the light to one side. And I think actually, if you had the light coming in from the left of the picture, and so so essentially, I don't know whether you can move the light or whether you would move the table so it was sitting, so the window light was coming in, and you came down a layer. I would say you moved down, so you're a little bit more side on to it rather than looking at it from above. I think that will give you a better sense of sort of being on an even. You're then studying it rather than just sort of looking down at it. And a nice soft side light would create a whole bunch of shadows, which would add a nice sort of homely, earthy mood to it as well. So with that, I would say, play with that idea. I think, I suppose really just to kind of go on about, to go back to that point of the angle at which you're doing this. The height you're doing, it looks very much like it's as you're standing at the table and you're looking down at it with your phone from the height you are naturally at. And then, the phone might be slightly further away or closer depending on what you're trying to do. But I think things become more interesting quite often when you change the angle. What might this look like if you shot directly from above? What might it look like if you were absolutely side on to it? And sometimes that changing the height can have quite a significant impact onto your photo. So I would say consider that idea. Change, so you're thinking about lighting and you're also thinking about the angle of the camera. Right, okay, let's move on to the next one. I was there. Okay, now this one is called Hit the Post. Now, it took me a little while to figure out quite what that meant, and that's basically because I'm not a huge football follower. However, what I did recognise is that this is a mural, and it's in Dumfries, along Terregles Street, I think, which is near the Palmerston football ground for Dumfries in Scotland. And the Dumfries football team is Queen of the South. And these people are all decked out in the Queen of the South colours. The mural looks like there's different things going on. There's sort of from trips, in the past with, in sepia here over on the left, more modern coaches, people moving around. Now, hit the post then is a term for a kind of a near miss. Basically, when playing football, you kick the ball, instead of going in the goal, it hit the post. And what I'm guessing here is that hit the post is essentially tying in with the fact that we've got a post office letterbox on a post in front of the football. So hit the post, play on words. In terms of improving that story, I suppose, it's, one of the things I would say you have to be slightly careful of always is things can be, if you've got like a pun or a play on words, it might make sense to you. How well does it translate beyond? If you're not familiar with football, it wouldn't work. People will be, well, what do you mean? There's a post there. I'm not necessarily sure what it is. If you are into football, then that's fine. So, but knowing your audience is part of that. I think in terms of layout, you've taken off. You've included a bit of the wall on the right of the mural, but you haven't on the left. And so it feels like it's sort of a little bit cropped in a strange way. And let me just sort of show you briefly then. If we take this into Photoshop, and again, if I just tilt that, well, maybe I don't have to tilt that. If I just sort of crop that into there, come in that side, and then we'll just take out the bottom of the pavement. So we do something like that. And I think immediately that sort of gives a slightly better composition. You've now got a kind of rule of thirds. You've got the bottom third is the wall, top 2/3 is the mural. You've got so that's one thing you can do to improve it. But I think really, if it's about improving the story, a really nice little addition to something like this would be to have an actual football just sitting at the bottom of the post, or even, well, maybe not sitting on top, but just either it's resting there because it's rolled into it, or if you could be really fancy and quick and you've got a mate who can kick the ball and you can catch it, have the ball bouncing with a little movement blur bouncing off the post. Yeah, that might work. Okay, let's what have we got next? Next we've got okay, it's not allowing me to do that. Homework club. Well, I mean, it's a good lockdown photo, isn't it? I mean, yeah, homeschooling. It's all been going on. We've got the art class going on in the garden. Now, one of the things here is you'll notice there's a bucket of stones down in the right-hand corner. The girls are obviously painting the stones here. I'm guessing there's probably a stone behind this girl's arm over on this side. Now, I don't know what it's like in other places, but one of the things I've noticed a lot around, I've seen them in Castle Douglas, I've seen photos of them in different places in Scotland. There's been a lot of painted stone snakes almost, for a whole bunch of different reasons. Some have been in support of the NHS, some have been in support of a particular person who's maybe been having an operation, some have just been a kind of community minded. And what's been happening is people have been painting stones, and then there's a particular place along the street or nearby where when they go out for a walk they place the stone, and some of these are beautifully painted, bright, colourful, some of them have little messages on them, and as they get added on, some of these have now got several hundred long, and I go out for my little walk and I walk past and there's all these lovely colourful stones, and it's a really lovely thing. Feels very communal, really, community, because lots of people are doing it, and so that's nice, and I guess that's what this is tapping into here. Now, one of the things in terms of getting the story across, again, there's a sense of being tilted. I think if you just angled this again a little bit clockwise, so that really that central pole was central, I think that would make a difference. So now it's not really going to, again, I'm going to have a crop here, but you see that automatically makes it a little bit more. Now, but again, in terms of what I've also talked about some of the others, is breathing space. What would be quite nice, I think, with something like this would have been if it has stretched out a bit. Now I'm going to click content aware here, and it's not going to fill it in properly. It's going to look quite bizarre, but it's still just, all I'm really wanting to do is give you a sense of shape. Yeah, we've now got, it's copied off bits of faces. So let's just see if we can get rid of a little bit of that. So it's not quite as disturbing, one would hope. I'll get rid of this little face down there because it just does look a bit creepy. However, just in that notion of the space, I think if you've got a little bit more, you've got a bit of space either side of them, that helps. Because part of the problem that we have here is there's a massive gap between the two girls. Now, it doesn't feel like a massive gap when you're there. And this is one of the key things to understand about photography, is gaps get exaggerated. The reason your wedding photographer is always going closer is because, if I'm holding, a glasses case next to my head, now in your normal field of vision, which is somewhere way over there to somewhere way over there, the gap between my head and the glasses case is only about 5% of your vision. But when the edge of the picture's here and the edge of the picture's here, this gap is now about 30% of your vision. So the gap itself feels bigger. So in a way with this, by widening it, the gap doesn't feel quite so big. Another way of doing this would really be to move round and actually do a little bit of perspective where you're kind of leaning over the shoulder of one of them. So you can see the shoulder and the hair and maybe an arm coming forward, painting behind one of them, and then you're also looking then maybe at the head down of the other one doing it. And then that way, because one's looking over the other, you instead of having a gap like that, you now move them both into the same kind of area of the screen. So, I'd really kind of suggest playing around with the angles, I think, with something like that. Right, okay, what have we got next? Next up, lockdown essentials. Now, what we have here is a still life of things that the person deems presumably to be important for lockdown. Now, the first thing that grabs our attention is, of course, the toilet roll, and unless you've been living on an entirely different planet, we all know the whole kind of toilet roll stories of just not being able to get a hold of any. Fortunately, they're all back in the supermarkets now, but now, after that, we can look around and we can see other things. There's a little teapot over on the right. In fact, that's one of these. Confused me for a moment. I wasn't too sure of this. I just thought it was a teapot with two funny handles. My wife, far more sophisticated than I am, pointed out that no, it's a tea for one set where you have a little there's a teapot on the top and there's a cup underneath. My ignorance. We've got a grow your own veg in the background. There's a coffee pot behind the teapot. There's a little egg cage, an egg cup, a little coffee mug in the foreground. Then things start to get a little bit, I'm not quite sure what's happening. We've got a flower here. I think it's a flower, but I don't really know why it's there. And then we've got a jar which says Sven on it. Now that doesn't really make a huge amount of sense on its own. If I zoom, and now part of the problem here is the fact that, like I said, I've got low resolution, but if I zoom right in, it looks like that says starter, and the last bit is a T. So my guess then is it's a yeast starter, which is fine, so you can do your sourdough bread. Maybe. Then there's some other things around here which I can't really make out. It's plastic sitting in a basket over there, could be medicines. Not sure. Now, in essence, the big problem that you've got here is that you've taken it in a very low light. And what happens is your phone, because it's a low light, your phone has really ramped up the ISO. And the ISO makes it a very fuzzy, noisy picture. And then because it's the software of the phone, then knows that it's noisy, so it smooths it out. And in essence, it smooths out on auto settings. It will smooth everything out so that you lose a lot of the detail. Everything looks slightly blurred, almost slightly painterly, because there just isn't the sharp texture in there. So this could be an actual flower, or it might be a felt flower, or it might be a paper flower. We don't actually have the texture to be able to tell. And I'm not sure, is that soap in a soap dish? I can't make out what's going on in the background. So I get I think the premise is a fun one. The problem is here is the limitation of the phone in a dark space. So really the thing to understand, especially with your phone camera, is these things are designed for light. They're designed for outdoors. If you're going to be doing something indoors, you've either got to have a lot of bright light, or you have to look at the manual settings on your camera, on your phone, and see if you can do a slower shutter speed in order to let more light in. Now, you then run into all sorts of problems that if you're holding onto the phone and you've got a slow shutter speed, the wobble will make it blurred. Now, that's not to say these things can't be worked around. You can get little mini tripods, and you can get phone holders. That's So this little top bit here, there's a little thing you can buy. You can get them on Amazon, around about a tenner or less, and you can fix, you place your phone in there, tighten it up, and then you can do, and then you can get little tripods. This one is called a gorilla or a grip or an octopus one, and what happens here is it's bendy, right? So you can grip it around things. So you can grip it around a step ladder or a shelf, or or you can just kind of angle it and sit it standing on something. So very handy little thing. The whole lot will cost you probably less than £20 to get, and then suddenly it opens up a whole new world of being able to do lower light photography, or if you want to do time-lapse movies or things like that. So I'd seriously have a think about investing in something like that. So yeah, I like the idea. I mean, compositionally, the toilet roll is this great big patch of brightness, and so it grabs all the attention and removes the attention. So maybe look for ways of softening that down. Maybe the toilet roll could have been at the back with other interesting items in the front. But your biggest problem here is that of low light. So you would look to get a stronger light into this. Right, next one. What we got? Okay, still not wanting me to do that. This one is called Lockdown's Over. And I guess really what it's just about is wee dog jumping. So a kind of a happy dance in a way. What we have is, now the dog is, the face is a little bit out of focus. But the bags behind are quite sharp, are much more sharply in focus. So it's not just a case of a movement blur here. I don't really think the blur has come from movement. I think the blur has come from the fact that the camera has focused on the camera's focused on the plants behind rather than on the dog. I think the other thing that we've got here is you're not 100% sure whether the dog's feet are on the ground or not. I think dog's in mid-leap. But it's very difficult to tell because it's been taken on a dull light day. There's no real shadow to tell. What would have, I think, made this slightly more interesting is if you take it on a sunny day and you've got the sun and you've got the shadow coming down, because then if the dog's in mid-air, you would have the shadow clearly separate from the dog. And I think at that point, your brain goes, aha, dog's in mid-air, rather than maybe dog's standing on back legs or whatever. So if you're going, so I think that's really it. Where if you're going to, think about the lighting, but also, and it's always a tricky thing if you're taking a photo of a moving object, you're trying to be quick. The phone is quickly grasping something before, the moment you hit click, it's latching onto something to focus on. And if you thought you had it on the dog and the dog moves just in that moment that you hit press, it focuses on the bit behind. So I'd watch out for that. And then finally, in the phone section, the last one that we've got, this one's called Where's the Glass? And basically, I mean, the title then presumably, this large kind of greenhouses, old buildings, the glass is long gone, at least from the roofs. And in fact, if we zoom in, we can in fact see there's little holes broken. So there are bits of glass left there, but not on the roof. Now, I'm guessing here the story is it's a kind of urban decay. You see it, you think, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. There's interesting lines. Decay is always one of these things. There's a whole genre, really, of photography of decay and urban decay, which is always sort of slightly interesting. And then you've put it in black and white, presumably because it's echoing this idea of aging, a bit like the 1948 photo. However, there's two things here. You see, I think for my thoughts, there's two different ways you could go with this. If you are talking about the decay side of it, then really I don't think you need the black and white. I would quite like to have seen this in colour, but maybe a slightly desaturated colour. But the fact is, you've got all the weeds growing up around the front, and then you've also got there's a little sign there, a little warning, keep out sign. Now it's very difficult to make out the fence here, But in colour, you make out the fence. And that sign, that bright yellow warning sign, would also add to the fact that, you know, this is an old building, it's dangerous, it's going to fall down, you're not allowed in. So actually, this is one of those things where I think by taking it into black and white, you've lost some of the impact of the detail. Now, if this isn't what you were going for, if it was not so much the decay but the lines you wanted, because there's a whole sense of photography whereby you go into black and white because it's all about the line and the shape, and you're getting more abstract with it. So it's an architectural kind of thing. Then at this point, you wanted to have had a slightly different angle. You're not fully straight on with it, but you're not at a nice kind of 45 degrees into it either. I think this could have been a lot of fun if you'd maybe gone round. We can see over on the left here, there's, you know, that you might have been able to move around into this corner here, and then depending on whether you can stand on a box or whether you can lean up a bit, you could have been looking down the length of some of these long iron bars, and started playing with some of the shapes within it. So I think that would have been really quite interesting to do. And then if it's all about the line, then I think you can go black and white, because it's about the line, it's not about colour. If this is about decay, decay is also about rust, and it's about overgrowth, in which case I think the colour play a part. So that's where we are now with the phone entries. I'm going to do a little quick flip over to Facebook, just see if anybody's wanted to leave any comments. Katie, well past my bedtime. Yeah, that's Katie in Australia. Absolutely. Oh, got a hi from Finland. Tula or Chuala? You'll have to forgive my Finnish. So hi from Finland, that's brilliant. And David Vickers, hi Kim, I'm from CD. Hi David, wow, that's as close as you can get as opposed to Melbourne, which is about as far as you can get, and then from Finland. So we've got everybody from literally just down the road to the other side of the world. That's fun, I like that. Okay, so question then. Which one am I going to choose as my first? I think, to be honest, my first place for the phone is Fruits and Labours, and I think first of all, it's all in focus. It's had a lot of thought and preparation gone into it. Things have been, yes, of course, I can talk about how you would be at a different angle and different lighting, but these have been arranged with thought about how it's gonna be put together. So for that, whoever did this one, and there's there's jam as well, and fruit, and there's a little bit of mouth watering going on. I think there is a sense of senses being triggered here. So yeah, this out of this group of 8, I would say that Fruits and Labours is my first place. So I think is it Keith who's making the most of marking, so they get the points for that. Second place, I think I'm going to go with 1948. Again, I think it's in terms of it's got strong diagonals, it's got thought in the composition, and yeah, there is a feeling of conveying that story. I've got a story, I've got a mood, I want to try and get that across, and you've worked at that. Now I can say move the camera angles and give it more space, but yeah, there's technical thought gone into this, which I like. And then third place, sort of slight toss up really, but I think in essence I'm going to go down with Lockdown Essentials, because of the thought process that's gone into it. There's an idea here, and then things have been gathered and put together. I think there's plenty of room where you can go away and play, and I would really suggest, even just go to Pinterest or Google Images and look up still life, traditional painted still life. A lot of what we do with photography, the artists were doing with paint centuries before we got to it. And they started learning. They are the experts on, the old masters are experts on light, and they're experts on composition, and we can learn so much from them. Go and take a look at some of these old still lifes, and then start arranging your shelf using some of those tropes, and I think you would find that the whole thing lifts up a thing. So, but I think there's a lot of potential in this, so that gets my third place. And then I think as a commended, we'll give the Homework Club, because it's so of the now. I think homeschooling. Say certainly play with the angles and the composition, but I like the idea. So that's the phone part of it, and I hope those who entered have found that useful feedback and interesting. So a couple more comments. Fiji liked the first and the last, and the girl's painting is so pretty as well. Maggie, oh, that's my wife. Hi, Maggie. Can we see the photos again? Well, that was probably sent just before I did. Okay, let's do a quick run through just so you can get that. That was 1948, which was my second place. Then we've got Digger, Fruits and Labours, which was my first choice. Hit the Post, Homework Club, which gets commended. Lockdown Essentials, my third place. Lockdown's Over, Where's the Glass? Yeah, and Where's the Glass? So those were the hold on a sec, I've just done that and realised I'm still on me, so you didn't see those. Right, sorry about that. Yeah, so 1948, Digger, Fruits and Labours, Hit the Post, Homework Club, Lockdown Essentials, Lockdown's Over, and Where's the Glass? And if you think whether you agree with me on my choice, or whether you feel it should have been different, then leave a comment, let me know. I think at this point I would like to say a little bit about entering competitions with photos, that there are different things which are going to influence the judge. There are the technicals, right? And a lot of times people focus on the technicals, and because they can be important. If the thing you're trying to focus on isn't in focus, it doesn't convey the story as well. If the crop isn't right, if there's other things you can do. So the technical side of things, whether it's compositional or literally the settings on your camera or the way that you've edited, these things all contribute to the quality of the photo. The other part of it is the story. The story, the mood, the emotion, the thing you are trying to convey. And here is a really important thing to understand about photography, and the difference between doing a snapshot for yourself and doing a photo for a competition. When you take a photo for yourself, maybe you're out there, you know, nice sunset, you take a quick photo. There's your dog in the garden, you take a photo of the dog in the garden. There's a nice rose sitting on your table, which you pluck from the garden, you take a photo of the rose. And while these things are fine for you, if all you need them for is a record of the event, then that's fine. It doesn't need to be anything more. You take a photo of your grandchild or your pet or something, and it's a nice reminder. But when you get into competition level, that photo has to go beyond your memory and beyond your emotional attachment to that thing, and to be able to convey that to somebody else. And this is something that gets lost in an awful lot of photography, is I can take a photo, and I can take a photo of an old book because I loved this book as a child. And so when I see the photo, it evokes all the memories I had as a child of reading this and all what was going on in my life. But I can show that photo to somebody else, and to somebody else it's a book. So what? Doesn't mean anything. Because they didn't read that book. They didn't have my childhood experience. They can't access my memories. So if you are trying to get somebody else to feel the emotion, you have to look at the photo and go, what do I need to add or what do I need to take away from this photo in order to hone, to purify that essence of story, of mood, of emotion? How do I get somebody else to feel what I feel about this? And that's the much harder thing to do. Now, the technicals, keeping it in focus, understanding your editing, understanding your composition, understanding your lighting, understanding your camera settings, these are all then an aid to getting your story across. Because if you change the lighting, you can sometimes make a story more powerful or less powerful. You can make something moodier or more dramatic or less dramatic and softer. If you change, I've got earlier episodes, I've talked quite a lot about the notion of use of diagonals. Diagonals add an energy and a movement into a picture, whereas horizontals and verticals stabilize it and reduce that energy. So understanding these techniques are not just about trying to impress somebody else with your technical ability, it's about using them as tools in order to be able to get your point across. To be able, if you are trying to say this is an energetic driving picture and you want to have that mood of energy, then you need to be thinking about your diagonals as an example. So the technical and the story are the two really powerful things. The third aspect is for the person in a competition is the judge. And every judge is different. Every judge is bringing something else of it to them. So, for example, if we go back to the football picture, because I'm not a football player, I've never really thought, I was one of these appallingly, awfully uncoordinated children. As a child, when they picked the teams, we're all standing up against the wall, two captains out front, I was always the last kid to be picked. And now I'm not doing this to try and evoke sympathy, it's just that's the way it was. But the point I'm trying to get across with that is that experience actually turned me off football. And now I've probably lost a whole bunch of football fans here who say, well, I'm not going to follow a photographer who doesn't like football. The thing is that football doesn't do it for me in the same way. So I'm not going to be drawn to a football picture in the same way that I'm going to be drawn to a portrait or a constructed photo. My whole photography, you go to Kim Ayres Photography and I'm all about constructed photos. So you also need to understand that the judge is going to come up with different ideas. Now that's not to say that I can't be, I've seen some fantastic sports shots of footballers, in midair, heading the ball or with rain coming down and that foot kicking through and you can see spray coming off, and at that point I can go, wow, I'm caught up in the emotion. The photographer has really got the emotion that goes past and supplants the limitations of my experience and desires. So if you know what you're doing and you can convey that story, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get it in such a way that it goes past whatever prejudices or moods or experiences that the judge actually has. And of course the other thing is how well does all this fit the competition title? If your competition title is something blue and you shove in a red sunset, it's not going to do very well. Even if it's the most glorious sunset that has ever been taken, it's in the wrong competition. So in terms of understanding competition, you need to understand the title and make sure your photo matches up to it. You need to understand the story you are trying to convey. You need to make sure then that once you are clear on what mood or idea, your concept you are trying to convey, every aspect of that photo is either contributing to that or it's taking away from it. In which case you need to sort of be looking at the different aspects of what can I do to enhance this photo to get that story across. And then all your technical understanding, your shutter speed, and all this is all in support of these things. So that's probably the most useful information you're ever likely to get about how to enter a competition or understand. I wish somebody told me all these things years ago. It saved me an awful lot of bottom 10% in various competitions. Not to say that still doesn't happen occasionally, but less often. Right, okay, so a quick over in the comments. Scott says, I like the homework club for the win. and hit the post for second, and then jam for the third. So there you go. Scott has got a completely different idea. Well, you know, jam would have come up top 3, whereas I put it first. Scott would have had it third. Hit the post didn't come into mind, but for Scott, comes first. Scott comes second. So that shows you how it can vary from person to person in terms of judgment. I think that's kind of fun and interesting in its own right. So let's go on to, we're now going to move on to the DSLR entries. And once again, I'm going to go through alphabetically, and we'll see what we've got now. First one I've got is called A Sign of the Times. So what we've got here is there's skeleton with a hat and face mask, triple seat there, stay safe, wear a mask, have a seat, being tested, and bunting in a park. Now, there's an interesting point on here, which is about where the creativity comes. Because what's happened is the photo, this is a photo of what I assume somebody else has done. You've been out for a walk, you come across it, you go, that's interesting, I take a photo of it. Now we might think that's a great concept. We like the concept of the skeleton with the mask and what have you. Is it your concept? Now, if you built this and then you took a photo of it, then absolutely extra points to you. I suppose the point I think is, as a judge, I don't know whether you did. And I'm going to assume, because this happens a lot, where you've come across it and taken a photo of it. And so there is this thing, if you take a photo of a statue, if you take a photo even of something like the Empire State Building or the, something, an existing thing, where's the creativity? Is the creativity coming from the photographer, or is the creativity, or are you just kind of documenting something that's already been created by somebody else? Now, the way round this is, what you have to do is you then have to put your mark on it. Yes, you've come across it, but what you're doing is you have an interpretation of that building, of that statue, of that whatever's happening in front of you. So you're not just documenting the event, you're creating your own interpretation upon it. And if you're with the Eiffel Tower, you're taking a photo of the Eiffel Tower, somebody else built the Eiffel Tower, sure, but you're capturing it at sunset. You're capturing it with a riot going on in the front of it. You're capturing it with a mime busking or something like that. So you're creating you're putting a juxtaposition between one thing and another. So with something like this, what I would say is, depending on the mood, the story that this means to you, you might want to try and enhance that. Now, you're on this is the DSLR category, so there's maybe more opportunities for editing. Not sure, most people who've got a camera have got some form of editing software on their computer which they transfer it to. You might not have Photoshop, but just to show, again, there's a little thing here where I just want to straighten it a little bit. So if I just take that seat and, yeah, there we go. So that the seat parts are now, the legs are straighter and the seat is horizontal. That just, OCD? Not sure, probably not. But, there's a little bit of that. That's not quite tilted up. That feels slightly better. Those diagonals look slightly better as well, I think. With this though, we've got quite a large bright patch of grass at the top here, at the bottom, which is grabbing, drawing our eye away from the key point, which is the skeleton with the mask. And there's a patch of sky up here. So the next thing I'd be tempted to do really is add a vignette to that. So I'll just quickly do that in raw filter, camera raw. So if I take a vignette and I just add that, you see, we darken the top and we darken the bottom, and it draws the attention a bit more into the middle. And then what I would also do is, maybe I'm going to play with the clarity button, which creates a nice bit of contrast. And you can see I just start sort of doing this, and I'm going to exaggerate it because it's a very quick effect. But now what happens is the texture of the bones and the skull leap out that little bit more. So we've gone from this to this. Does that make sense? So in terms of, you've got an idea and you kind of, you take that idea, how can I ramp that idea up? How can I improve on that idea? How can I get that story to really intensify a bit more? So playing around with things like that, I think, is maybe a way to go with that. So so for anybody out there, if you're taking a photo of something which is pre-existing, whether it's at the moment there seems to be a lot of scarecrow competitions around. I sort of keep going around the place, and there's different figures being dressed up, and it's a lot of fun, a lot of entertainment. Somebody else has created it. You're taking a photo of it. You want to put your stamp on it. What angle are you using? What lighting are you using? And then how are you editing that as well? And what mood do you want it to come across as playful? Do you want it to come across as threatening? Do you want it to come across as a bit wild and wacky? Are you want it to come across as anxiety inducing or depressing? These are all different moods you can play with. So for anybody, when you're out there taking these photos, think about the way, what is it's saying to you, and what can you do to enhance that idea? Okay, next photo is called A Wet Day in Lockdown. And let's just get rid of the rulers. No, not the rulers. The clear guides. That's what I wanted to do. So, a wet day in lockdown. Presumably what this means is because it's wet, you're not out in the garden, and so whatever's happening is happening indoors. That places you within a particular group of people who have a garden to go out. I was chatting to my son, who's up in Edinburgh, in a flat in Edinburgh, doesn't really get out much, doesn't have a garden, who was bemoaning the fact of all these people talking about, all that lovely weather we had for the first couple of months of lockdown. And we were Skyping, and I said, it's just been fantastic, love all this weather. And he sort of looked at me puzzled and said, and he'd sort of take it almost as an insult that, while he was stuck in lockdown, he was stuck in a house, he didn't have a garden he could go out and sit in. Anyway, that's sort of a slight thing, but a wet day in lockdown. So fine, what we've got here is the knitting going on, is a nice little kind of domestic scene. And I quite like the colour palette with it as well. These soft blues, the whites, got the white of the sofa cover and the white of the wall. We've got the blues of the cushions and the wall behind it. The blues also down in the knitting bag. Little splash of red on the collar, little splash of pink down in the knitting bag. I think it's quite a nice colour scheme. Now, interestingly with this is, the painting on the wall behind is obviously not straight. Now, that's fine. It doesn't have to be. If you really felt that strong, you could go in Photoshop and just tilt it a bit. But what I do tend to feel is I'm kind of aware that the legs don't look straight. Again, there's a very slight... Now, what's happened here is because you've decided to include this bit of doorway, I suppose it is, or this wooden panel here on the right, is such a bold, strong, powerful vertical line that you have to get that straight. And that means instead of choosing to get the table straight, you've chosen to get that straight. So the table looks, because it's just so dominant. But I just want to show you briefly, if I just bring that in and we crop off that little bit there. Well, we can maybe just bring that up a little bit like that. Then we notice that this doesn't look quite, this still has a slightly more tilted feel to it. And so if we just literally turn that clockwise, what's that, only, a degree, 1.3, something like that. And now suddenly I think that fits slightly more comfortably. Picture behind still needs straightening out if you want it straightened out, or if you like the idea that it's not. And for me, I think that, for my taste, I think that works a little bit better. I think that strong white line down on the right, I don't think was really adding to it, other than it making it feel like it was part of an annex room, which maybe that's what you wanted. But I for my taste, I don't feel it was overly necessary. I think we cropped that out, and now we've got a slightly better scene within it. The only other thing that I would maybe sort of suggest with something like this, obviously, I don't know whether this is posed or whether this was just grabbed, or whether you came in and said, no, hold it there, don't move. Let me just take this. Got the dog sitting on the sofa behind. I think it would have been nice if her arm had just been stretched out a little bit more to create a diagonal. If you had a nice little diagonal line that, let's just turn that for a moment, ran that way rather than being curved, I think that would have created just a nice little shape. That's, you know, a sort of a diagonal shape, maybe sort of coming down here a bit. We're nitpicking at this point, but it's just a thought for you to play with. Next is called an illuminating read. And I've done photos. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what, let's just double click on. That will give you a slightly bigger version. Sorry. There we go, right. There we go. And yeah, I've done this one before. It's a fun trick to do, where what you do is you take an off-camera flash and you tuck it underneath the book, you know, or some kind of light source. Maybe it's done with a torch. My guess is it's an off-camera flash. And then you've got somebody reading and the light is shining up on their face as though they are being illuminated by the text itself. The book itself is so lighting up the mind, you know, their face is being lit up. So it's kind of analogous, but it's also a way to play around with light and shadow. So it's a fun thing to do. I've seen variations of it done quite a lot, and you know, this is another version. And yes, I've got versions of this. I think, in fact, I think if you go to my website, I've even got a version of this. My own interpretation of doing something like this as well. So we've got that. The next thing then is, so that's the story, an illuminating read. He's being lit by knowledge. Are there ways that we could take that idea and ramp it up a little bit? Now, first thing is, the book itself is lost in shadow. What is it he's actually reading? Now, it's very difficult to tell, but actually, if you do zoom in, actually what I will do here is, let's go back to this version. That's not quite what I meant to do. Zoom in. Because there is a little bit of text here. So I'm just going to take the curves a moment and drag that up. And we can actually see it says the ideal cookbook. And it also looks like, given the fact that the rest of it is in dark shadow, I'm guessing that in the editing process you have deliberately lightened that bit so that it can be potentially seen. And I suppose that's that. You know, I was slightly confused by that, because you've got this big old tome, and I can understand the idea of a big old book, you know, that is so arcane knowledge, but it's a cookbook. I think a cookbook, I think if you wanted to emphasise the fact it was a cookbook, I think you could maybe have had other things around. You know, maybe, you know, some fruit or some vegetables, or even something, you know, nice little painting of plums on the wall behind could be fun. So what is there a significance of the cookbook, or, you know, is that adding to or taking away? And if it is supposed to be adding to, then I think there's other things you could have been doing to that to enhance that story a bit more. If it's just the idea of a big tome, then maybe you don't need for us to be able to discover that it's a cookbook. The other thing is the lamp to one side. You've only got a dribble of light at the top. Now, my guess is essentially the light of a flash is overpowering the light. So there's not much coming off there in your camera settings. Now, a way round that is to change the settings on your camera so you're taking more of the ambient light in, so more of the lampshade would glow orange, and to lower the power of the flash, take it down a few stops. You might have to do a couple of, you know, a few takes just to sort of work out what the best settings are. But then you would actually maybe have a bit of the orange glow of the lamp. And I suppose there's another sort of slight thing here, which is the lamp is next to him. So you can understand the idea of reading by lamplight, but he's not being lit by the lamp. He's being lit by the flash underneath. So to me, there feels like there's a slight imbalance or a slight uncertainty here. Maybe if the lamp was moved slightly forward, maybe if the lamp was stronger light. I mean, a way round it, if you can't get the ambient light, and what I've done before now is I've stuck an off-camera flash inside a lamp stand and put an orange gel on it, and then that kind of lights up as well. So you can play with that as a secondary form of light if you're using off-camera flashes or speed lights. So I think there's ways you can play with this. I think I think there's a chunk of space above the top of his head, which I don't really feel is adding anything to it. I would be more tempted to crop that. And again, give it just a little bit more breadth to read. It's a book and it's reading. And so you kind of open the book. There's this sense of landscape is in the strength of this. And I would want to create it a little bit wider. Now you can then drag things over, play with rule of thirds a little bit, but I just think sort of quite simply something like that sort of gives it a little bit more shape to it. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas with that one. Let's flip on to the next image. This one's called Car Trouble. And I suppose it's that kind of thing where reminds me of when I was a kid. My dad used to there was a garage round the corner, typical, old little kind of old run garage. Health and safety wouldn't allow it these days, but yes, you'd have a guy sort of sitting there with a fag hanging out his mouth, and you're thinking, well, hang on, you've got oily hands, you've got petrol all over the place, surely it's a disaster waiting to happen, and yet somehow they seem to survive. Or maybe they didn't, maybe there was just a lot more accidents back then, there aren't so many these days. So Car Trouble, I like the fact the guy's got oily hands, having his smoke before leaning into the car. There's not a lot of the car here though. I mean, we've only just got a little bit of the bonnet coming up here, or the hood if you're in America, and a little bit of the you can see a tiny bit of engine down in the right. I think actually I would have preferred to see a bit more of the car. So the guy's not wearing a boiler suit, so at this point I've got to assume that actually it's not, this isn't outdoors in a garage. This is like literally out on, maybe in a car parking space, or in a, just outside somebody's house. And this is, classic dad, uncle, whatever, is going to sort out your car for you, have a quick cigarette first, and then dive into it. So yeah, kind of fun, but I would really wanted to see much more of the car. I think also if you're going for bloke with cigarette, that you're trying to, there's a natural kind of almost cragginess you're attempting to go. You want in something like this, in which case the lighting would have ideally been different. Now I get the fact that here what we're talking about is you're just using the ambient light, you've taken a photo of what was already there. But the light is obviously behind him because the back of his head is lit up more, the front of his face is more in shadow. It would have been kind of more interesting if you had the light sort of slightly behind, or over in this direction, or you moved around, or we've got his face sort of partly lit. I think side light would have been nice on this. Okay, next one. We've got Catch of the Day, and this is as far as it says to me, it's a fairly straightforward. Here's what I caught, and here are the tools I used to catch it, and it's resting on a nice wooden park bench. Now, I think with this, the first thing that strikes me is the crop feels a bit awkward. You've got the bottom of the net quite clear, and to the left you've got a strong bit of net, but then you've cropped it off on the top and the right. This is quite a distorted, it's very wide angle. It's not quite fisheye, which I suppose fisheye with a fish might have made a slightly better pun if you're going there, but it is wide angle. Things are distorting at the edges. I again pull back a bit, will give you a little bit more space to take it in. I think another thing that's going on is because of the way it distorts around the edges, it makes the belly or the middle part of the fish larger. And there's not so much going on with that. A fish where is most interesting photographically is with the head or maybe the tail and the fins. I think for something like this, it might have been much more interesting if you'd come down a level. If you come down more at the angle of the, come down to bench level and take a shot, and then have the front of the fish looking into the camera, and then the length of the fish disappearing in, along with the rod and the reel disappearing down. You could have got some really quite interesting kind of lines running into the picture. That would have been a way to take it. Or even standing literally directly above it and having the circle of the net and the fish and everything, but you would need to get the height, and trying to get that height, and given the fact that that wooden bench looks a bit rotted in places, you know, I wouldn't risk standing on top of it. But if you were setting it up, you would maybe use a step ladder or something else. So I think by and large with this, you really want to play around with the angles a bit more. You know, you've got your fish, you've been triumphant, you've gone out, you've hunted, you're bringing back the food to feed the family, and that's great. But if you're trying to kind of capture, hey, look what I got, other angles I think would do it better. Okay, this one is called Free as a Bird. Now, it took me a moment to figure out what this is about, because obviously there's a bird over on the right hand side, and you go, oh, okay, that's a bird, but this is a reflection, there's a tree, there's blinds, oh, there's a face. And the face has a mask over it, and it's an older, grey hair, glasses, so we're assuming an older person. So now we've got a story, we've got somebody in isolation, and there's a bird flying past. So Free as a Bird, that longing, and the fact that we've got glass and blinds and a mask, we've got 3 layers between us and the person. So I get the story, or at least that's the story that I take from it. However, I think the biggest problem that you have here is that the camera has focused on the reflection at tree level, which is way behind, so that the person themselves, which I think is a hugely important part of the story, you can barely make out. I think really if you had focused on the person, then I think you would have still noticed that there were reflections of a tree and a building and the bird. But you would have been more aware of what the story was. The story is about the person feeling trapped within it. The story isn't really about the bird. The bird is a support for the person who's trapped. So the fact that you've got the bird in focus, but the person isn't, I think is a kind of, although your title is Free as a Bird, the story is about the person. And so because the story is about the person, we need to be able to see the person. The person needs to take front stage with that. So within that, if you're going to do this kind of photo, I would say, consider that as a point of really, if you're going to do it again, go back, make sure the person's. The other thing is to maybe move left and right a bit with the reflection, because it then ends up very unbalanced, because the tree itself, the reflection of the tree is running halfway through the face. So all the kind of dark area feels bunched up on one side. And if you're trying to get the person in it, they're getting lost in the reflection of the tree as well. So move around a bit, don't feel like you have to stay in one place. You might be in that place when you get the idea, but try the move left, move right, move up, move down, focus in, focus out, and take 2 dozen different photos. See what works. We learn from trying, we learn from getting out and experimenting. And it doesn't matter if you take 200 photos, only one of them works. It's only that one that works that you're going to be putting into the competition, But all the ones that didn't work were all learning processes. And again, I think there's a really important thing here, which is we look at other people's photos when we go into competitions, and we see the winning photo, or we see a photo, or we see a photo where you go, wow, I love that photo. My photos aren't like that. What we don't see is the 400 other photos they took which didn't work. And everybody's like that, and that's okay. We don't learn from the photos that work. We get all the praise for the photos that work, and we love the praise, and that's great. That's why we put up our best photos. But we learn from all the photos that go wrong. You have to embrace that when you're doing the photography. Take as many photos as you can, and it doesn't matter if there's was it some famous photographer, and I can't remember if it was Ansel Adams or Henri Cartier-Bresson, who said, your first 10,000 photos are your worst. And I love that saying. Initially it can be, oh my God, how many do I have to take before I start getting any good? You don't have to take 10,000 before you start getting good, but the fact is that there's a learning process. You keep taking photos, and all the ones that go wrong are a little step towards getting it right. And then when you've got that right, when you've mastered that aspect, you can then do another aspect and another aspect. And a lot of these are running parallel. So don't be frightened of getting in and playing. Right, next one. Insomnia. Okay, now this one's got a lot of layers, a lot of things going on to it. I mean, there's instantly depth-wise, you've got tables running down, we've got wall, we've got behind the wall, we've got looks like a nice little comfy living room area, nice comfy sofa, big plump cushions. This presumably is taken in the kitchen or dining room. Jigsaw bits about, the whiskey, we've got coffee mug or hot chocolate, cocoa powder in the background, looks like might be Jaffa cakes or some kind of chocolate biscuit over there. So, and then we've got a phone over here. So a very constructive photo, head in the hands. Now, I misread this first of all, thought it said isolation, so I interpreted it one way, then I saw it said insomnia. You go, oh, okay, so different interpretation. And that's an interesting one, it's in its own right, I think. It's quite simply the title you give something. You can look at a picture and just the title you give it. What difference, if you call this isolation, I think it has a different feel. Now, I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying that my own misreading of it raises the point of the title you give something can profoundly affect then the interpretation of the picture. But this one is called insomnia. So insomnia, person's not sleeping, presumably up in the middle of the night. They're not lying on the comfy sofa, they're sitting there at the table, they've got their whiskey, they've got their cocoa powder and stuff. The phone is on. So there's lots going on in here. I think in terms of improving, seeing how can we take this further. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't help but feel that there's a very slight clockwise tilt to it. And I think, again, what's happened is you've anchored the left of the photo, a bit like other ones are anchored on the right. You've anchored on the left to create the strong vertical. But this has meant, as it's sort of moved across, the verticals have sort of ended up tilting over. And I think if you'd anchored the centre line, which is very slightly tilted to the right, if you'd made that stronger, let me just show rather than tell. All it takes is we just tilt that there with 1.3 degrees. And suddenly I think that just feels, there's a straightness to this bottle of the Glenmorangie. It's still tilting slightly, but it's not as far over. The chair is now feeling straight. The table's feeling a bit straighter. We've got the diagonals. This is moving. This side is now moved to the left, but that doesn't matter so much. We can accept the idea that it's tilting out at the sides because the centre line, that vertical is the vertical that's holding the picture together. I like the diagonals, I like the curve of the body, I like the head in the hands. There's a really strong story, a lot of thought gone into this and playful. But I think so that's in terms of tilt, but I think there is a problem here with the fact there's a bright white dressing gown is catching all the light from above. If that dressing gown had been grey or dark blue, just a darker dressing gown, I think it would have absorbed the light better, wouldn't have made it as so all-consuming, because that's all you see, and then you have to sort of force your eyes around. It's a bit like the toilet roll in that Lockdown Essentials. It just grabs all the attention before and then each time you try and look at the other stuff, which is really interesting, your eye keeps getting dragged back to it. Another option here is to have had a light from, if you'd actually had a lamp light over on the right-hand side, which was then shooting light across and creating shadows from the jigsaw box and from the whiskey bottle across towards, then that could have been quite fun. Again, a little off-camera flash with an orange gel in it, something like that. That's just other ways you could do it. I think the phone being on is fine, I think, because that means that gives that idea, because phones turn themselves off within a minute or two if they're not being touched. The fact that that's on presumably has been done deliberately. But the colour palette, that bright blue, I think grabs too much attention. Everything else, we've got these more muted browns and greys, apart from the white, which I feel I've already said is a bit overpowering. But the plate is white, so we can kind of get away with the white in a bit. But that blue just feels kind of out of place. I would have thought a different colour. I mean, because it's not... Yes, the phone is one of the aspects, like the whiskey or like the biscuits, but it isn't the dominant part of the story. But because it's such a different colour, and it's so this bright blue is grabbing our attention, again, it makes us feel there's more importance to it than there really is. So primarily with this one, it's about the white of the dressing gown and the phone. And I think if you played around with that, that would really sort of shift you up to the next level with this photo. Now, next photo. I went through some of these photos with my son last night. We were chatting and sort of just bouncing ideas around, and he said, that's cheating. And I thought, okay, there's a really interesting point in this, which is compositionally, technically, if you look at the last photo we looked at, there's a lot of thought gone into the composition and layout and the technicals and what's in focus and where the light is falling and what have you. And there isn't in this. This is kid with happy smile running towards the camera. And the thing is you can't look at it without having a big smile on your face. So the fact that the fingers have been cropped off, the fact that presumably mum or auntie is sitting in the background, finger in the mouth, got no idea what the finger in the mouth is. I can't imagine for a moment it's a deliberate part of the story. It just happens to be, maybe she was biting her nails, or she just stabbed her finger with a needle or something. Whatever it is not really a part of the story. The story is that fantastic, beautiful expression on the wee girl's face. Assuming it's a wee girl. I'm going on the hair clip for that. You can let me know otherwise if I was wrong, in which case I apologise. But everything's about the expression. And this is one of those things where content trumps technicals. In terms of getting a mood across, this absolutely gets a mood across. It makes you smile. And I think that in a way, this almost typifies the frustration photographers have with things like Facebook. And there is no doubt, if I put all 22 photos up on Facebook and we put a competition, we put a poll out, which one's going to win, bam, this would get it because it makes everybody smile. And all the photographers would be going, yeah, but it's at a bit of an angle, it needs straightening. But the fingertips are cut off. Oh, but what's the woman doing in the background? Oh, and they'd all be absolutely right. But if you're not a photographer, you don't care. And that's a really difficult thing to, and it's one of those kind of annoying things when you can do all this technical stuff and it absolutely gets wrong. This has the same effect as cute kittens, or puppies or baby hedgehogs. In our family, we talk about the Meg effect, and the Meg is my daughter. And one of the things I discovered long ago is here I am, I'm a professional photographer. I can do photos where I have a team of people and I take all day, and I have fancy lights and I have hairdressers and makeup artists, and I create this sort of dramatic staged piece, and I'll put it on Facebook and I'll get about 20 likes. But if I stick up a photo of me and my daughter sitting in a cafe having a hot chocolate together, bam, I will pass 200. The Meg effect, daddy-daughter photos, what's not to love, right? And that's because Facebook isn't made up of photographers. It's made up of 99% not photographers who are photographing their daughters, their kittens, their lunches. So it's an odd one there, because like I said, it's a photography one. Technically, the big thing you have got right is you've got her face in focus, which is absolutely what you need. Any other part of this, all this could be technically brilliant, but if you didn't have her face in focus, it wouldn't work. But you do. The camera has managed to get her face in focus, so you've got that beautiful, beautiful smile. Beyond that, technically, there's so much else that could have been done with it. But it doesn't matter what I say because everybody else will go, oh, he's so cute. So that's kind of fun in its own right. I think that was worth, worth talking about the power of a cute photo. Now, whether it wins a competition or not, whether it would win a Facebook poll, wouldn't necessarily win a camera club photo competition where you've got photographers who are going, yes, no, but I spent all this time getting these diagonals and this lighting right. So I'm not going to just do it. I'm not going to give in to my emotional reaction of a smiling child. Actually, I'm just going to pause a moment before I come in. I just do want to quickly flick in. What else have we got here? Pat says, I did think, and what do I know, that the wooden post in the football photo was perhaps superfluous. Okay, that was an interesting point. And again, if you're not into football, then hit the post. Doesn't seem to make so much sense. Love the Rembrandt, illuminated Rembrandt. Alison, a wet day in lockdown was completely unstated. I had no idea he was taking the photo. He does that a lot. Okay, Alison, so you had your photo shoved up. Paul's gone ahead and done that regardless. Right, unstaged. Yeah, not unstated, unstaged. Fine. David got to catch another £5, 4.5 trout to do the photo again. No pressure then. Aha, there you go. £4.5. Wow. Okay, now that's a serious trout. Not that I'm a fisherman. I don't know. I do enjoy trout, but I've eaten £1 to £2 trouts, not 4.5. But again, I would say there's no obvious size thing particularly to get to. So if you're going to take that photo of the trout and you're trying to say, look how big this trout is, then I think you need a couple of other things there to give you a sense of scale. Paul Creswell, it's the same dog. It's the same dog as... What, the leaping dog? Is the same dog as the one sitting behind Alison? Not sure. Okay, we'll come back to that one. Right, let's flick back. So we're now Lovers Liaison. So this one, presumably, you've gone along, you've caught, there's a couple sitting on the bench, taking the photo. The fact that you've used the term Lovers Liaison, so it's not a brother and sister happening to look at the phone, we're going with the idea that it's a couple. The liaison kind of makes it a little bit, maybe should they be meeting up? A nice little spot. You've got the bench. The way the tree comes down means that even if somebody was on the other side of the river, they wouldn't see them. So it does make it quite secluded. We can only see their backs. I think for me, the black and white is another one of these where I would have preferred to see the colour. I'm not sure why you turned it to black and white, because for this, what we've got spring grasses here. There's daisies, there's buttercups. And that notion of spring, we've got leaves on the trees, that notion of spring ties in with a lover's liaison, There's also, now, again, it's difficult to know what's going on in the background, the other side of the tree. Is that a wall or is that a river? I think it's a river/canal of some kind with a brick wall, but it's not so obvious. And yet, if this was in colour, we would have the reflections. If it's a river, we would have the reflections. The reflections might even have a kind of Monet artist painterly look to them, which would add to a romance feeling of it. So I think that the colour of this could have been used a lot more. So go back, play with that, see what the colour does, and I think you might find that there's, or let me know, leave a comment, let me know why you decided to go black and white if you feel that it was enhanced for that reason. Now this one had me thinking for a long time. I was trying to figure this one out. My apprenticeship. What I'm not sure about with this is how much is this stuff literally laid on top of the sheet of paper, or is stuff being photoshopped onto it? Some of these things, so the set square, or it's not a set square, sorry, your angle square here, these rulers do look like they've been laid on top, as does this pair of compasses. But if we look at this here, I can see the text through it. And this, what I think is presumed as an ink bottle, looks like a drawing of an ink bottle that's been sort of cut out. So I'm assuming this is collage rather than literally laying everything out. Now it's called my apprenticeship, so we look at this. This is handwritten. This is we've got drawings. We've got all about roofing, pitched roofs. So there's draftsmanship in here, draftsmanship, and then we've got all the tools of draftsmanship. So I'm guessing this is maybe again, I'm unfamiliar with how these things go, but you know, where you have your kind of proof thing, you know, you have to draw up something like this. This thing is then judged, you know, it's submitted as part of your apprenticeship to sort of come up and then sort of move on from becoming an apprentice to becoming a fully fledged. So we've got that, and then you've overlaid things with it. Now, so is this photo? Is this collage? Does it matter? I suppose quite often when I'm looking at a photo, we're looking at depth. We're looking at photography is a two-dimensional thing, but we make a three-dimensional illusion out of it. This has more of a kind of graphic design feel to it rather than direct photography. But then if you're a draftsman drawing these things, I can kind of see where that would be coming from too. So it's a tricky one, this. This is one which I think is probably far more meaningful to you or to other people who understand the background of this than it is to me as a photographer who doesn't have this background. But at the same time, I can see that a lot of thought and energy and effort has gone into it. It's probably the kind of thing I just like to sort of sit and chat with you about, to be honest. I'd like to know more of the story about it, what some of these different tools do, and what the background is. And the reality is all these drawings, I mean, these days computer-aided design, I would guess, make a lot of these tools absolutely redundant. So there's a history here that becomes interesting. But I'm not sure, like I say, there's bits that look like they are cut out and put in, and some that look like, you know, like that ink bottle doesn't really look like an ink bottle. It looks like a drawing of an ink bottle cut out and stuck on. So I'm less certain what's going on with that, but interesting nonetheless. Okay, preparation. I will just let you know we're down into the sort of final 4 images before we go back and choose which one. Now, preparation. So preparing, we've got the Divine Office. We have so a religious book, the Luminous Mysteries Light, introduced by Saint Paul. Pope John Paul is written on the paper, sticking out the top there. We've got a dog collar, we've got Virgin and Child, we've got candle with God and other bits of writing, and what looks like a face mask for Corona. Oh, and we've got a crucifix on a rosary, I think. So preparation. So I guess then this is a preparation for holding services again. Given that we've got all the religions thing, it's a book of prayer, dog collar. So the story here presumably then is that the priest is of course churches have been in lockdown, or rather because of lockdown, churches have not been allowed to have gatherings of people. We're now at a point whereby places are being opened up and allowed as long as you're keeping distance and you're wearing masks and bits and pieces. So presumably then this is in preparation of starting the services again, and you've got the religious bits, but the extra bit is the fact that you've then got the face mask as well. So that's making the story. So that's kind of an interesting story, I think. In terms of enhancing that a bit, I think the fact that it's on a mantelpiece with a kind of bubbled wallpaper behind, I think it might have been more interesting if it was wooden or stone, or maybe if you managed to take this sort of in the church, place in the church itself, where you'd had these things as though you were waiting for, in preparation of people coming through the door. I think that could have been really interesting. The lighting is just a side light, I'm guessing comes from the window, and yet you have a candle here. And I think what might have also been really interesting, another take on it, or maybe combined with, would have been to just allow the candle light and have this lit by candlelight. Now, whether a single candle will give you enough light, I don't know. Maybe you'd have to do tripod and slow shutter speed, or maybe you'd have to introduce a secondary light source which imitated the candle. But I think the lighting could have been more interesting. If you'd chosen to do it by candlelight or pretend candlelight, I think that could have been interesting. And I think instead of just kind of a standard wallpaper, glossy wallpaper, you'd done some kind of stone or wood panelling or something which or had this evoked the smell of the church, if you like. Or so, you know, that I think we'll go with that. Next picture. Okay, that's not allowing me to. Let's. Where are we? Prerequisition. I think with this, it feels like it's got a couple of different stories, which are. But the problem is I don't feel the one story. There's an immediate story of colour, bright red or sort of pinky red, bright purple, and then a bright yellow of the sunflower. So still life kind of thing, where you've got sunflower in Whitley Neal, which is gin, handcrafted gin, rhubarb and ginger gin. But presumably we're not feeding the sunflower on gin, so that's an empty bottle now being used as a vase. And that's fine, but then why have we got this? Now this it says hand wash on it. And I think my guess is with this is that what's happened is there's been a few gin distilleries who've converted their distilling processes into making hand wash and hand gel. Part of the whole coronavirus COVID thing with shortages of hand gel, a lot of gin distilleries turned their production away from gin into creating hand gel. So prerequisition as a title is my guess is what we're probably talking about is that. So that we've got the gin bottle and we've got the hand gel bottle. I suppose that's what's making the gin bottle now irrelevant for gin, so we'll stick a sunflower in it because the gin is now being used as hand gel. It's taken me a while to get to that. My first thought is it's colours. My first thought is it's you've got sunflower in a bottle, but why do you need the other bit? So whilst there is a story there, I think there's a lot of work to get to this, and this is one of the problems again. For you, the story might be really clear, much like the hit the post was really clear to the guy doing the football shot. How well does that translate outside your head? Maybe everybody picks it up immediately. Maybe somebody else is struggling to find the story. Compositionally, I think it's all sort of sitting slightly over to the right. You could have done with a little bit more space underneath, and maybe you don't need as much on the top. So again, if I just open that with Photoshop, in essence, what you really want is that coming down there, but then that coming out there. Maybe remove that a little bit, kind of rule of thirds-ish kind of thing there. Actually, let's just do that again, but let's do content aware. That's what I meant to do. And we'll just sort of shift that. That's not done content aware. That's just done black background. Okay, let's just try one more time. No, I'm not getting that. Okay, well, let's just crop that in a bit there. But I think you can imagine if it got a little bit more space down the bottom, that would have balanced it out better. So balance-wise, I think you had a bit too much space at the top, not quite enough space at the bottom. And you know, great strong colours. But I think the story is about trying to. If your story is about, you know, look for. I think that the sunflower detracts from the story of the gin and the hand gel. I don't know what you would do instead, but I think it does kind of take it away. So that's your thought, right? Last two photos to look at. We've got Just Take One Bite, brilliant Snow White, evil stepmother kind of thing. Take here, have the apple. Of course, you know, the offering of the apple. We've also got the Adam and Eve idea of apple. You know, it's an ancient, very old kind of cultural idea. The fingernails, and whether they've been painted to go along with the apple or whether it's been photoshopped, the apple and the fingernails are now an identical colour, and I'm suspecting that that's been enhanced in Photoshop with the editing. I like the idea. I like the fact that you can't see her eyes as well makes it that little bit more mysterious. As soon as there's a person, the first thing we want to do is we want to look at the eyes, and when we can't see the eyes, it always feels a bit more suspicious. So there's a sinister nature to this, which is nice. I think my feeling with the editing is it feels like it's been over edited a bit. I would love to see the original. I think if I had the original, I would play with it a little bit more. I think you can see there's just a little bit, and I don't know whether you can see it. I can just see it on. There's a little bit of shoulder light coming up here. So other than that, it's sort of lost in black. And I think, and there's a tiny little bit of down on the cuff, which again, depending on the settings on your screen, you might not see. I think you could have got away with having texture in the top that she's wearing. It didn't need to be. Otherwise, it's sort of a slightly disembodied head. I think the apple shifted just rather than right in front of the chin, just slightly off to one side of the chin, or that way even, either way. I think just move the hand over to the left a little bit, allow the chin out and allow the apple. You can still have it coming forward. I think could work quite well. And again, the red feels like it's overcooked a little bit. I might sort of play around with the levels a bit more, but other than that, the story's nice. I think the way you've done it's quite, but play with the editing. Okay, last picture to look at in the group is this one's called the COVID Arcade. And so story, I recognise that's the Lawburn Centre in Dumfries, and what we can see is a pretty empty arcade other than the cleaner. We've got these little foot stickers 2 meters apart for people lining up outside. The only thing that happens to be, is somebody in the background there moving a barrier, I think. The only shop that seems to be open is Superdrug. We can go and get your hand gel and your makeup. And there's a backpack in there. So the story is obviously the emptiness of it. Again, there's a tilt thing. What is it about? Is it me? Is it me just getting too paranoid about things not lining up? But I just want to tilt that a little bit. There we go. 2 degrees clockwise, 1.8 degrees clockwise. Actually, it's gone fractionally too far. I just want to get that. There, 1.5 degrees clockwise. I breathe slightly easier. I think actually what would have been more interesting with this is if you're slightly off the centre, you're not right over on the edge of the wall, but if you'd actually gone dead centre with this, if you'd actually, along the same line as the points of these diagonals, and you'd stood back a little bit further, I think if you'd gone back about 4 or 5 feet, maybe 10 feet, you have your wide angle lens, you would have got a bigger sense of the sense of it. You would have had what would have looked much more of a symmetrical photo, but one of the things I talked about week 3 or week 4 was the idea of asymmetrical symmetry, where it's almost symmetrical except for some little aspects which are different, and that's what grabs your attention. And those aspects then you would have had the cleaner. I think if you'd been back a bit further, you wouldn't have had the backpack of the guy, and I think that backpack sort of detracts slightly. You would have seen that there was only one shop open, but I think you would have then got a more interesting shape of the corridor of the shopping mall itself. So really, I think with that, I can see the story, but I think you could have enhanced that story by being in the middle, a little bit further back, and allowing yourself to be looking straight down the middle of it, and then the cleaner's off to one side and the open shop is off to one side, and that would have given you that, and the yellow triangles in the bucket, they would have been down the other side, and that would have given you a more interesting composition. So that's the pictures. Okay, so to go on one of the comments from before, what I'll do is I will run through these again and show you all the photos, and you can shove in the comments which one you think ought to be the winner, or your first, second and third, and then I'll tell you what I'm going to do. So, a sign of the times, a wet day in lockdown, An illuminating read, car trouble, catch of the day, free as a bird, insomnia, look mum I can walk, lover's liaison, my apprenticeship, preparation, prerequisition, just take one bite, and the COVID arcade. So those are the photos, and what I did is, now my choices are, well, should I just flick? Anybody writing in anything yet? No, nobody's shoved in anything yet, so it's just down to me. Maybe everybody else has gone to bed. It is getting quite late now. So my choices then are, first place goes to insomnia. And for me, it's, whilst, you know, interesting enough, I could spend hours critiquing it and talking about all the different things you could do to improve it. But that's because I'm actually quite excited by the picture as well. I think a lot has gone into it. A lot of thought has gone into it. I love the layers. I love the levels of thought. I love the fact that, you know, it's not that you do have the whiskey and you do have the cocoa and you do have the chocolate biscuits. And I love the fact that there's a warm, comfortable couch calling in the background, which he's not sitting at. So there's a lot of depth. There's a lot of layers. There's physical layers. There's interpretational layers. And there's a lot of thought gone into it, and the composition as well. There's now, again, I could play and I could, you know, talk a lot about tweaking and what I might do differently. But if we're talking about this group of 14 photos, to me, this is the standout one and gets my first prize. Second, I think I'm going to go for Just Take One Bite. Again, it sort of can talk about the over processing, but it's gone for, you know, you've got a clear story, you've got an idea, we know what's going on straight away. It's an enjoyable photo. I like that one. And then third place, this is sort of slightly trickier. I think there was a couple, 2 or 3 that I had. So what I'm going to do here is, my third place, I think, is the illuminating read. And, you know, again, I can come up with lots of different ways you could do this or ways you could improve this, but there's thought gone into it. When we talk about the notion of the theme of this is tell a story, the thing that all the first, second and third have in common is the fact that they have planned the story. And so if we go back to what I was talking about earlier, about criteria, you need it to be technically, it needs to work. You know, you can't really, you've got to make sure that it is in focus, it is lit properly, you know, you've had some thought as to your composition, and that you've edited it in the way that is going to show it off at its best. You need to have a concept, a story, an idea that you're trying to get across, and I get that with all of these. And then you have the bias of the judge. And the simple fact is, I'm a narrative storyteller constructing photographer, you know. And so these appeal to me more, you know. If you'd had a wildlife photographer, they would have come up with something different. If you'd had a street photographer, they would have probably come up with something different. If you'd had an architectural photographer, they would probably have come up with something different. So these are my winners. And then, but I do also want to say, I think I want to give a commendation to A Wet Day in Lockdown. Although Alison says she was caught unawares and Paul's just gone ahead and taken the photo, I like it. Like I said, I don't think there was much need for that, for the big post on the right, but it does have a nice kind of, there's the colours are good, the composition is good, there's a domestic piece to it, kind of Sunday afternoon feel, which I like. And then I think also, yeah, sorry, got to do it, commendation to this one. It puts a smile on my face. Here I am, you know, technical photographer and all the rest of it, but, you know, it does it. I'm sorry I couldn't put you in the top 3, but I will give a commendation for that one because it puts a smile on my face. And I think one more commendation actually is going to go to my apprenticeship. Um, I still keep kind of coming back to it. I keep thinking about it, and I'm still not totally sure what I think about it. But but for all these reasons, it's engaging me at the same time. I can't just dismiss it. But it's the kind of one where I would sort of really just want to sit down and spend an hour chatting with you over a coffee about it. Really. Um, so those are my choices. Um, uh, Let me know if you think differently. And just close those. Flip back over to Facebook. Um, Paul says, "Do I get any credit for being the model in Insomnia?" Ah, okay. So it was Alison who took that one, was it? Right. Okay. A little bit of uh, all right, yes, Alison's put in. "Thank you so much, Kim. I entered at the very last minute. Paul was my reluctant model. I'm so chuffed." Linda says, "Really like the atmosphere in Insomnia." Um, Peter's come in. "Thanks for the commendation, Kim. I had my granddaughter run across the room for 20 minutes to get that shot." Aha, right, brilliant. And that's great. Thank you for letting me know that, Peter, because I think it is important, that notion that, yes, we want to get that shot. And it looks like it's just captured in the moment. But no, you kept doing it for 20 minutes. Fortunately, grandchildren love doing that kind of stuff. Keith, completely agree about the layers of Insomnia. Almost has the feel of a documentary piece. So yeah, this is great. We're getting some nice comments coming in now. I was starting to sort of say there, a nice little bit of rivalry between Alison and Paul there. So Paul took a sleek it photo of Alison while she wasn't even aware of it, and then Alison staged Paul to get all the bits and pieces. So yeah, that's fun too. Okay, so whoever's doing the scores for this to take back, then oh, Katie, you're still up. Nice photos, love the illuminated read, stunning very painterly. So Katie in Melbourne, it must be well past sunrise. Oh, I've got to remind you, it's in the middle of winter down there, so I don't know whether your sun has risen yet, but you really should get to bed. I'm assuming you're coming at it from the angle of having been up all night rather than that you've got up particularly early. So yeah, that was fun. For those of you who are now watching this on the repeat, you can click, you can rewind, you can go back over. If you're watching this now on YouTube, please leave comments as well. Just let me know what your thoughts were. I mean, obviously be polite. This is about encouraging people. It's not about turning around and slagging anybody off. The fact anybody who's prepared to stick their photo up into a competition and put it up there has automatically got a level of respect from me. We can take photos and we can be afraid to sort of put it up because we're afraid of judgment. And people who turn around and start slagging off somebody else's photos, I've got no time for. I can certainly talk about how I would improve it, but and to try and help you take your photography, give you ideas as to what you might do next time. But you automatically have my respect for actually putting yourself out there in the first place. So congratulations to everybody for doing it. Congratulations for the next level for those that I chose and gave commendations and wins, or second or third place too. If you found this interesting, if you think you've got benefit from it, please consider the idea of a wee donation to paypal.me/Kim Ayres. You can see it down in the bottom left corner. Bottom right corner as you're looking. Okay, not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. And next week I'm going to be looking at a photo which is one of my favourites that is sort of up there in my top handful that I've ever done, called Artists at the Nail Factory. If you belong to the Facebook group, then it's the one that I've got as the banner piece. We've got several different artists in a space where I took the photo to make it look a bit like an old master style. I was using a lot of the tropes of that. So there's lots to talk about with that. And I'm also going to be talking about the notion of where you use fake lights, strobes, speed lights, flashes to pretend to pretend it's real light, you know, so it's you're faking it. So I think that could be fun. So tune in next Tuesday, 7:30 UK time, for that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. I guess it is. So thank you ever so much for taking part. And if you haven't already joined the group, if you've been watching along, or you are one of the people who's taken part in this, and you would like to get more feedback on photos in the future, every week I do a critique section. So join the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Just put it in quotes, or just write it into the search bar on Facebook, you'll find it, and join. And from there, any photo you would like to submit, which you would like me to give feedback on it during the next program, stick it in the thing. Tell me a little bit about the story, about the photo, what it is you were trying to achieve, where you feel your sticking points are, and then I'll give you as best feedback as I can in the following episode. Other than that, I will see you next Tuesday, hopefully. Enjoy the rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.